I'm happy to introduce Margret Gilbert today here. The talk was advertised as an internal seminar, and I'm happy to say that it is really true, because this is not the first time Mark is here, and even though he is based in Emory, he feels that he is kind of ours as well. So, he works mostly on, I'm sure you know him, but he works mostly on philosophy of social sciences, and he will talk today about joint action. So I think we will work out the details of the talk together in the discussion.
That's true. I'll figure out what I'm saying as I talk. Thank you. It really is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back in Naturalistic with wonderful colleagues and a great place to do philosophical work. And I'm really happy to be sharing this work. This is things that I'm actively thinking about, so I'm looking forward to your feedback on these ideas. I'm going to be talking about the literature and question about joint action. And I'm not going to assume that you know anything about this literature, so in the first part of the talk I'm going to try and give you a really quick survey of what's at stake in the literature, what the major positions are, and what the topology of the field looks like right now, just very quickly. And I'm going to introduce a distinction between, and I'll use that to set up a distinction between minimalist and maximalist accounts, two varieties of ways of approaching joint action. And at the middle of the paper, I'm going to focus on what I'm really trying to do is resolve a problem. Recently there's been published an interesting argument that minimalist accounts of joint actions can't succeed in a certain way. And I think that's an interesting argument I want to take seriously. And what I'll try and do then in the second half of the talk is show that maybe they could succeed. I will be giving you a minimalist account of joint action, though I won't be arguing for it directly. I'm not going to show that it's better than the alternatives that are out there. I'm going to show that it could fill the space that needs to be filled. And I need to find my clicker. So, the question of joint action. The phenomenon here is the intentional working together, the two of us doing something that in some cases perhaps I couldn't do alone. A case of moving a couch together. It's not true of me that I moved the couch. It's not true of you that you moved the couch, but in an important sense, we moved the couch. And it was an intentional action, right? We did it intentionally. Playing a quartet together, again, this is something that we do, not just I do. And painting a house, maybe I could paint the house by myself, but we painted the house together. It's not true of me that I painted the house, but we painted it together. The constraint, philosophically, that makes this interesting is that if we're understanding this in terms of intentionality, my intentionality seems to apply to me, not to you. That is, I can't intend for you to do something. Ask you to do it. I can't have a genuine intention to do it. So the puzzle that got people started on this is what does it mean for this action to be intentional in a joint kind of way? Is that even conceptually possible? Or is there some sort of interweaving of individual intentions that gets us to joint intentionality? The background to the contemporary Anglophone literature on this is the literature on action theory, which really gets started in the 1950s. But this work in particular is inspired, and I think it's fair to say falls within the framework of what gets called causal action theory. And the idea here is that if a bodily motion is to really become an intentional action, then it must be accompanied by, or preceded by, or caused by a special kind of mental state. We're going to call it an intention. Now, one of the literatures is this a sui generis mental state, or can it be reduced to beliefs and desires? Yeah, that's an issue in the literature. But everyone agrees on this picture, that actions are the kinds of things that are brought about by formation of intentions. This picture can't be right, though. It makes a certain amount of sense for simple actions. So I decide to pour myself a glass of water, and I just do so. But what about something that takes a little longer to execute? I wake up in the morning, and I decide to ride my bicycle to work. Okay, it's a beautiful day, my bicycle's working, I made the decision, I do it, but that's going to take a lot of time. And in fact, a lot of things are going to happen for me to successfully ride my bicycle to work. I've got to dodge all the other bicyclists. I've got to work around obstacles that arise in the traffic. I have to not fall into the various holes and do 1,000 things that all keep that from happening, right? So all of these things I'm also doing, and it's not like they're unintentional, but it's a little weird to say that when I quickly went around that pedestrian, I was forming an intention and then doing it. It's not quite the same as the original, I decided to ride my bicycle and now I'm doing it. The standard way in the literature of understanding this these days is to distinguish between prior intentions and intention in action. So when I wake up in the morning and I say to myself, I'm going to ride my bicycle to school today, that's a prior intention. The action in some sense comes afterwards. Searle, who introduced this particular language for this, used an example to illustrate intention and action. He said, suppose I'm sitting at my desk working on this philosophy paper, and then I just stand up and I start striding around the room. It's not a deliberate action. Did I form an intention to do it? No, I just did it. It was intentional, and that's the sense of intention in action. It's the intentionality of the action itself as I as I do it. So a spontaneous action then would be an action where there's just an intention in action without the formation of a prior intention. But a deliberate action would be one where there's a prior intention and then also an intention in action. So the idea is that all actions are intentional in this sense. Deliberate actions are intentional in that sense. Now, I want to emphasize the literature on this, on action theory, going back into the 60s, focuses almost entirely on prior intentions. The whole analysis game is to figure out what an intention is, in mostly the sense of a prior intention, and then intentions in action, they'll take care of themselves. The literature is really quite ambivalent about actions that don't have prior intentions. It's not really clear sometimes whether they think these things are intentional really at all. It gets talked about in terms of habits, for instance. Well, it's a habit that I have. It's habits that I use to ride my bicycle, which isn't quite right. But the point I'm making is that the prior intentionality gathers all the attention in this literature, and this is certainly true in the joint action literature. So the joint action literature, in its sort of standard, the main player form, is primarily an analysis of the joint intentionality of a prior intention sort. Just as an example, I'm not going to give you I'm not trying to survey all the possibilities that are out there. Here's one of them, Michael Bratman's analysis. Actually, he's changed it a little bit. I'm choosing this one because, as complicated as that is, it's one of the simpler ones to explain. It's widely adopted, lots of people like it, and in some ways it's fairly straightforward. Let me illustrate it with an example. So, we're going to carry a basket of apples together. We're going to load this into the truck. All right, so now, Bratman's analysis says, first condition is that, so remember, it's an analysis, if and only if. So we intend to do something. We intend to load the basket into the truck, if and only if, first, we each have an intention. Now notice, and this is, let's see, this doesn't work here, that it's an individual intention. This is my intention and it's your intention. There's no we intending, but the content is plural. So everything that happens after that here is plural. So it's an individual intention with respect to a plural thing. So each of us has this intention. And then there's a second clause. I intend that we carry in accordance with and because of those two things in the initial part, and then what he calls meshing subplans. Now this is actually only half of the second clause, if you notice, because there's a symmetrical one for you, right? So I have all this stuff going on and you do too. I'm just going to focus on the one to illustrate. So what does this mean? First, my intention is in accordance with them because of your intention, right? So the fact that you got that intention is somehow causing or bringing about or supporting the formation and maintenance of my intention. And then there's what he calls subplans. And so a subplan is going to be the different parts of the action that need to happen if we're going to coordinate and carry the basket. So for instance, we're going to have to lift, and notice they're different. I'm lifting the left handle, or I'm lifting the right handle, you're lifting the left handle, right? And this is a nicely symmetrical action. You can imagine other cases, painting. I'm painting, you're scraping the old paint away, right? So those are the meshing subplans. And of course, then we walk. Now, there's a structure here. I have my intention because of the subplans and because of your subplans too. And then, now the picture would all flip over to the other side as well. I'm not going to draw those arrows. The third condition is common knowledge. So, I know that you know that my intention is being maintained by your intention in the subplans, and you know that I know about you that your intentions are being maintained by my intention in the subplans. So all of this is common knowledge of all of us. So this is, the cleverness of this analysis is it doesn't have a joint agent, right? All the agents are individual, and all the intentionality is really individual intentionality, but with this kind of complicated iteration, interlocking of the intentions, he thinks he can get an account of what it means for us to do something in the plural sense together. Now, Searle has a different analysis, Gilbert's got a different analysis, Tomella has a different analysis. I'm not going to distinguish among them here. For what I'm saying, those differences I don't think matter. So I'm going to keep Bratman as an illustration. One thing often a response people have when they see this is, wow, that's a lot of thinking to just carry a basket of apples, right? That's really complicated. There's a lot of, if you think that this is an analysis of the mind rather than of the meaning of the sentence, right? If this is the meaning of the sentence, well, okay, I'll give you the complexities, maybe so. But if this is what's happening at the level of the mind, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of cognitive labor. It takes a lot of cognitive machinery to maintain it. This is what motivates minimalist views. So the sense in which this is maximalist is it makes large demands on the cognitive system. It requires, in this case, something like common knowledge, which is going to be beliefs about your beliefs and intentions. Right? So that's already pretty sophisticated. It requires complicated propositional content to our intentions. So it makes those kinds of demands on the cognitive system. And that's what we mean by maximalist. The minimalists in this literature have tried to find ways of doing it without making such heavy demands on the cognitive system. Why? Well, think about little children acting together on this analysis. So we've got two little boys here. I'm imagining what they're doing is building a castle. Right? Now, they're doing it together. It's a joint action, one might say. But this is kind of absurd. If you have little kids, but you know that there's not a whole lot of subplanning going on. Right? It's something else. And much more importantly, there's evidence that children before the age of 4 don't have adult-like abilities to understand the beliefs of others. So the requirement that they would have a belief about your intentions or beliefs before about 4 years old, it's probably not true, right? So if Bratman's right, then they can't be acting jointly, right? But you might think that's a little weird, because he's making so many demands. Different kind of example. One or two of you remember me talking about this for many years. Jazz improvisation is a kind of a spontaneous action by adults. But if we're really going to do an improvisational passage, the idea that we would make subplans completely undermines the activity. No, the whole point is that it's not planned. So this would not catch the jointness of adult spontaneous action. Those are just two kinds of examples that motivate a search for an alternative that is less demanding on the cognitive system. Another kind of example, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but this is a picture of an experiment done by my colleague at Emory, France the Wall. And he built an apparatus here such that when the chimpanzees pull the levers, they have to pull them all at the same time. And when they do that, they get a reward. It has a lot of features in common with joint action. We can debate, and I'll come back around to this, is what they're doing a joint action or not. I forgot, any of the standard analyses, Bratman, Searle, Gilbert, no, can't be. Right? And then that, for some of us, that's, it'd be nice to be able to understand senses in which that's a joint action at least, and maybe it is a joint action. Finally, and this is a little bit more philosophically arcane, that is, if you're in this part of the game, then you're sympathetic. Lots of us are attracted to views about thought, meaning, language that make them social. Right? This can be Brand, it can be Wittgenstein, it can be Tomasello, it can be many other views. Right? If meaning is primarily, in the first instance, a social thing, right? It seems quite plausible that joint action, or capacity to act jointly, is going to be one of the conditions that makes that social situation work. In which case, if your account of joint action required complicated propositional structures, you couldn't do those unless you had a language. And Bratman's is very linguistic, and so is Searle's, not to mention Minimalist. So if you accept those kinds of analyses, there's going to be a kind of a circularity in the account. So another motivation, this is one of my motivations for exploring minimalist alternatives, is to get us an account of joint action that then might fund something like these social accounts of thought, meaning, language. So those are motivations for looking around for other places. I'll give you two examples, just so you can see, again, illustrate the kinds of things that are going on with minimalism in the literature these days. This actually isn't brand new, this is 2005. This is Deborah Collison's paper here was really the first to push a minimalist analysis against the maximalist. And she was thinking explicitly about the children and making the argument I just made about they don't have the cognitive equipment to satisfy those conditions, so is there a way of weakening the conditions? And you'll notice it's Bratman all the way down. Everything's exactly Bratman, except for this. She replaces the common knowledge requirement with a much weaker requirement of joint perception. And she's thinking of things like joint attention, which children, very young children, do exhibit. And joint attention here can be understood in a very simple way. It's simply, joint attention is me attending to some object, feature of my environment, and you attending as well, and as long as I'm tracking the object, I'm also tracking whether you're tracking the object. So this is so, I want to know if Monty is paying attention to this class. I'm going to look at his head and his eyes and his body. Right? If he's looking out the window, then I know he's not attending, but his eyes are following him. Getting CDB. And so that's joint attention, simply is me attending to this and attending to you, and your outer appearance, whether you're attending it. Little kids can do that. She wants to argue that this gets you joint action for little kids. So it reduces the cognitive load, so to speak, of the joint action. Here's another kind of view, and I'll come back to this view, but I want to give you a quick taste of what it's trying to do. This is so-called minimal architecture. It was four scholars, philosophers, neuroscientists, psychologists, trying to articulate cognitively what the minimal requirements for joint action would be. And drawing on the literature we know about cognitive and neurological mechanisms that support, promote, instantiate intentional action. And their view has three parts. They think there has to be some kinds of representations, two representations in particular, a representation of a goal, and now in ordinary individual cases of action, there's good solid evidence that at the level of the motor cortex, we are representing goals and also representing tasks. So in the motor cortex, I'm representing the bodily motions that have to undergo, I have to undergo to constitute the task, and I'm watching the goal, representing the goal, and seeing how those things are connected. The interesting thing about joint action, of course, is how does it have to differ if I'm acting jointly with someone? They say about the goal that I have to represent the goal as something I can't do by myself. So the goal has a different representation of me plus X. The task, as you can see, you've got the two tasks represented here. The two tasks, my part of the task and your part of the task, I'm representing that as well as their suggestion. Though, interestingly, it's not my task and your task on their view. It's my task and something else that has to be done. And for all their machinery cares, that could be a tool. It doesn't have to be a person. I think that's a problem for them. I'll come back to that. So those representations, there also has to be monitoring processes. So when I'm acting individually, I'm representing the goal of, saying, picking up the bottle. My motor cortex is representing the neural actions that have to happen for me to be able to do that. But I'm also monitoring how successful I am. So this bottle is, slowly moving, and I'm reaching, and then I realize that, I will catch it as it moves along, right? That's a matter of error correction. It's representing the task, it's representing the goal, and then as those things change, there's error, and I correct for the error. So there has to be a monitoring process that gets to the error correction. Now, interestingly, in human beings, there's a complementary set of processes when someone else does that. So your motor cortex, when I'm reaching for the bottle, my motor cortex is representing the bodily motions that get the bottle grab. What's cool is that your motor cortex is doing exactly the same thing. So as I'm reaching for this bottle, you're actually understanding it's reaching. And what that means is your motor cortex is stimulating the very same neurons. And the only thing that's keeping you from reaching out is an inhibition structure that says, no, don't actually do that. Right? It takes it offline. So there is a way in which we're pretty confident we do represent each other's tasks this way. The question is, for them, and we'll come back to this, how is that happening in joint action? Right? That's up for. And they also talk about, and I won't say much about this, what they call the coordination smoothers. And what they're pointing at is some very interesting psychological studies about cognitive mechanisms that we have that let us synchronize our behavior in various sorts of ways. So if I start doing this, and I won't embarrass you by asking you to do it too, if I said, clap with me, in seconds, everyone will be in the same rhythm. Right? It's not because you thought it out, not because you figured it out, it's because you've got a part of your brain that cues into that rhythm and lets you emulate it. Right? It's a coordinated, from a minimalist point of view, like, oh, that's pretty interesting. How does that figure into joint action? On their view, it figures in as not a necessary component, but as a way of facilitating, making the coordination, our joint actions more reliable, easier to fall into, and so on. So that's the minimalist cognitive architecture view. Notice prior intentions don't have any real role in this at all. There's no talk about intentions at all. If this is anything, it's an account of what an intention is from a naturalistic standpoint. Now, I said that there's a puzzle about, or a challenge to minimalist accounts. And this is a recent paper by Michael Bratman. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. He's Finnish. I don't have nearly enough vowels in my neural capacity to speak these names. And he makes a very interesting argument. He says, look, these minimalist approaches do one of two things. Either they're weakening or eliminating the analysis of prior intentionality. That's part of the maximalist analyses. But when you do that, you end up aiming at a different target. He says, this is his language, there's a tight conceptual connection between joint prior intentionality and joint action. And again, he's thinking about this from a causal action theory perspective, very common, very broad set of views. And from that point of view, you can sort of say, yeah, there is a conceptual connection. So if you lose that, you're not really analyzing joint action anymore. You're analyzing another phenomenon. So the little kids, for instance, yeah, there's a phenomenon there. That's not joint action, full-blown, full-blooded. It's something else. Alternative, and maybe Tollefson is doing that. In fact, Tollefson herself, at the end of that article, says, this might be a better analysis of intention in action, I'm not so sure. So she backs off stronger claims about whether this is really contradicting Bratman or not. Or, second thing that happens in the minimalist literature is you've just given us an account of the underlying mechanisms. None of the big players, Searle, Bratman, Gilbert, ever thought there wasn't a mechanism. them. They're not idealists. They're going to say, yeah, of course. There's some sort of cognitive and neural mechanisms that support and implement the functional analysis that I'm giving. So the minimalist cognitive architecture is not an alternative to maximalist views at all. It just gives us kind of the underlying clockwork in virtue of which we execute these two intentions. So in either case, minimalists have failed to really clear the field, or at least even really engage the field of trying to find a different kind of analysis of the same thing. I think there's a way in which he's really being fair to the literature here. I think the minimalist analysis on offer, I think he's got a case about them, right? They're either, they do tend to back off and say, well, this one doesn't contradict Searle or Bratman. And the minimalist architecture, for instance, the way they present it is not really clear that it's really in the same game. But if you have those initial motivations, especially the last one, you'd like to have a kind of joint action that show that those more elaborate cognitive structures really aren't necessary at all. And that's the kind of minimalism I would like to see. But if this is right, then I can't. I just wasted 6 months probably because I can't do it. So there you go. That's philosophy for you. No. Next thing, of course, is we say no. Here's the way I respond. I think we should respond to this. And that is the tight conceptual connection that he uses in the argument is actually exactly what we want to call, us minimalists want to call into question, right? In fact, I'm quite dubious about that larger causal picture of intentionality. I think that's deeply flawed. And so I wanted the minimalists to show that, right? So it's kind of question begging, but there's a deeper problem here. It's a problem in the whole joint action literature, and that is there aren't any clear criteria for deciding whether an example is a case of joint action or not. What we have is, in the literature really is something like the good old paradox we call the paradox of analysis. And this is a problem that goes back to the Mano. Moore formulates it again. What I have here is Fullerton's late formulation of it. And the idea is, look, if you're trying to analyze a concept, you analytic philosophers, then you got to know something about them. You got to know the meaning of the concept when you start. If you didn't know what it was about, then you wouldn't be able to tell whether your analysis was any good, right? But if you already know the meaning, then you don't need the analysis. The analysis is done, right? So the whole project seems to be either circular or pointless. Fullerton gives an answer, and I'm not worried about Fullerton. This is kind of a sketch of it, how kind of answer. He says he looks more to ordinary language in his solution to this, and says, before we do the analysis, we have a pre-theoretical, ordinary language understanding of the words. We're going to give an analysis of causality or intentionality or something like that. Well, we use these words. So we've got a bunch of examples that we normally use, things we're comfortable saying, intuitions about that. Then the analysis comes along, gives us necessary and sufficient conditions, which then draw a clear, bright line around a set of cases. Now, it's going to include some things that we didn't think of as examples before. And it's going to exclude the things that we used to think were examples. And so now it's a matter of reflective equilibrium, kind of tweak the analysis so it gets a little better, and maybe I decide that some of those examples that I thought were examples before really aren't, right? So I change my intuitions. The problem here, though, for this case, in joint action is a philosophical term of art. We made it up, right? It doesn't exist, it doesn't have its own life in ordinary language. So what we really have is a situation where the examples are what the analysis says they are. And this is a very bad situation for the literature, right? Because how do we know? I mean, then now the analysts just always say, it doesn't fit my analysis, so it's something different. That we can't allow, right? Something has to be done here. So the next thing I want to try and do is see whether I can articulate and argue for a neutral analysis. Neutral in the sense that it's not using the resources of any of the analyses that are on the table right now. In fact, I'm intending this not as an analysis or an explanation or an account at all. I want this to be a description. I just want to describe the field of joint action so we can have some sense of what goes in as an example or a counterexample and what stays out as an example or a counterexample. And I suggest that when we're doing this, the place to start with platitudes, right? Say something that no one can disagree with. Look, we're after intentional joint actions. So I guess they're intentional, right? And I guess they're joint. If you can articulate those things without presupposing an analysis, this is the tricky bit, then we're going to have a description. Let me see if I can do that. You start with intentionality. Now again, it's tricky here because the first thing we do is run to our philosophical intuitions and you're right back into causal theory. Right? We don't want to be there. So the place I would start is to look back to J.L. Austin's papers on intentionality. And I'll say this, if you're interested in action theory and joint action at all, and you haven't done this, then drop everything. As soon as this lecture is over, go to the library, get J.L. Austin's philosophical papers, and read A Plea for Excuses, 3 Ways of Spilling Ink. They're beautiful, brilliant papers. They have hilarious footnotes. And there's a couple of interesting lessons that come out of them, independent of analysis. One of the lessons that comes out of Austin's work, not just the papers on action theory, is that if you're trying to get clear about something, one of the things you should do is stop looking at it and looking to what is not it. So he looks at the intentional, unintentional distinction. And he says, we get all tangled up thinking, well, what's intentionality? We should be looking at what's unintentional. And he makes the argument that in ordinary language, at least, that's doing a lot of the work of the distinction. We have a rich language of unintentional. They're called excuses. It wasn't my fault. It was an accident. It was a mistake. The ball bounced badly. I couldn't have foreseen that consequence. Right? All this language of excuses to show that it's not an intentional action. So the platitudinous suggestion here is we use that. What is intentional action? It's the stuff that's not unintentional. Right? There's no excuse to say it wasn't an accident, it wasn't a mistake, I wasn't pushed. To say the same thing a little more positively, you might say, it's the kind of thing that we might be held accountable for, held responsible for, praised or blamed for. Right? Though, I don't want to put too much emphasis on responsibility here, because now we're starting to get into analysis. I just want to say, our intuitions are this is the kind of thing you might be praised or blamed for, that it's going to be the sort of thing that's intentional in the sense that we're after here. Alright, what about joint? Here again, it's very easy to fall into one analysis or another. So I want to try to stick with some platitudes, or at least neutral things. A feature of joint action descriptions is that they often have a plural subject. That's not enough, because there's many cases of actions that have plural subjects that aren't joint in any meaningful sense. It's easy to come up with examples there. This is a suggestion that Stephen Butterfield made in an essay. And that is, we look to a really semantic criteria. And so in logic and semantics, people talk about plural predication. And one of the common distinctions there is the difference between collective and distributive predication. So a distributive predication is true of a group, of a number of objects, when that predicate is true of each of the objects. So my example here is Peregrine's books are on the bookshelf. Peregrine's got a bunch of books, so it's a plural subject. It's true of each book that it is on the bookshelf. So, in this context, that is a distributive interpretation of that predicate. In some contexts, which is not very ambiguous. If it's not distributive, it's collective. All right, so an example here that I've got is, so imagine a 3-legged table. It's not true of each leg that it supports the table. There's some, they support the table together in some sense. So it's a collective interpretation of the predicate. Now, this is not built into the meanings, the semantics of the predicates. That is just a contextual matter very often. Certainly in the case of actions, context matters for which interpretation, collective or distributive, is going to be mobilized. Think of an example like predicate like wins the tennis championship. So I say, Lotso and I won the tennis championship. Collective or distributive? Well, it depends on what the tennis championship is. If it's a singles championship, then that has to mean something like, well, Lotso won it last year and I won it this year. Or I won it in the old codgers division and Lotso won it in the young professionals division, right? So each won, but they're different championships. If it's a doubles championship, Lotso and I won the championship, means that that's distributive, collective reading. I did not win the championship in that case, but we won the championship. So the suggestion I'm making is those two intuitions, those two descriptions are enough to circumscribe, at least roughly. I'm not claiming this is an analysis, and I'm not claiming a clear, bright line. There's going to be lots of borderline cases, as there should be, right? If we already had a clear, bright line, we wouldn't need the analysis or the understanding, right? So this kind of description, the action's intentional under description, right? So it's not an accident, something that might be accountable for under that, as described in that way, and the description in that context bears a collective, not a distributive interpretation. That's what we're after for our examples, right? Now our analytic question or a philosophical question is, what's up with that, right? In virtue of what do they have this property, how do we understand what's going on? I think this description really clearly fits the paradigm examples. You can run right through all the ones that are in the literature, and yeah, they all fall right squarely within it. And it excludes some things that it should exclude, so it's also can do some work for us. So here's a couple of examples. Pure coordination mechanisms. One of the experiments investigating coordination mechanisms didn't involve clapping, it involved rocking in chairs. Right? So they took two subjects, pairs of subjects, and they put them in rocking chairs, right? These chairs you roll back and forth in. And they told them that they were studying the chairs. They said, you want to know if they're good chairs, are they stable, are they sturdy, can you rock in them? And so you guys just rock, and there's some other instructions too that don't matter for us. What they were really watching for, right, evil scientists that they were, what they were really watching for is whether the people coordinated their action, and under what conditions they would start rocking together. And of course, they did, right? Being humans, they pretty quickly fell right into the same rhythm. Now that looks like it's not intentional action, right? It's not the sort of thing you hold them responsible for. If you ask them, hey guys, why are you rocking together? They're probably going to say, I didn't know we were rocking. I mean, didn't mean to do that. Sorry, that wasn't what we were trying to do. Right? You get that kind of account from them. So it's not an intentional action, but it is brought about by coordination mechanisms. So this goes to show this descriptive area is going to exclude some things that are brought about by mechanisms that might produce joint action. So we can't just blithely grab those and pull them in. Or a kind of classic example in this kind of literature: you've got a bunch of strangers walking the same direction down the street. They're all walking south, so it's true this crowd that is going south. Depending on how the story gets told, this is going to be likely to be a very distributive sort of interpretation, right? If they don't know each other, there's no cooperation, there's no collaboration, they never communicated, they're just walking down the street in the same direction. It's true of each of them that they're walking south, right? And it's a version of that, the whole thing is true. But change the example, and you get something more like a coordinated action. So it's all of us going out for a beer, and we're all walking towards the pub, and we're trying to make, we're making sure that the laggards know where we're going, and the people in front don't get too far ahead. Now it starts sounding like it's not a distributive fact about each of us are just walking in this direction. It's now a fact about the group that is walking in the direction. So I think that descriptive, my suggestion is that description captures what we want to capture in terms of just a pool of examples. Not the analysis, not the understanding, just a pool of examples. Okay. If that's right, then we've got to reply to Nonan's challenge here. And that is that pool of examples includes all the spontaneous actions, and it probably includes the little kids, depending on how little they are, right? And insofar as something like Bratman or Searle doesn't account for those things, then they failed in their aims of analysis. And I take it their aim is, though there's been some shifting in the literature and they've gotten a little squirrely about exactly what they're analyzing, but I think this also weakens their positions. Certainly the earlier views, and on some reasons concurrent ones, they're aiming at the whole field. And so, insofar as they haven't got the whole field, they're neither necessary nor sufficient. Right? So QED, chop. It's never that easy. Right? But it does weaken this tight conceptual connection. Right? You see that tight conceptual connection as an analytic suggestion. The suggestion is, what makes these things intentional actions is this stuff about the prior intentionality. Well, not necessarily. That needs some argumentation. All right. I said earlier that I thought that Nonan was largely right about the current minimalist views on offer. And that is that they largely don't really compete with with the maximalist views. I'm not, I think that we have to look at them piecemeal. I don't want to rest anything on that claim. What I want to do for the remainder of the talk here is to sketch an alternative that might take up this space. So what would a minimalism that actually did compete with the maximalists look like? And so I'm going to sketch a version of minimalism. I'm not really going to argue for it except indirectly, but I'm just giving you just one option. Right? And I'm not going to try and show this better than Searle or better than Bratman. But I want to argue that were it acceptable, it would be inconsistent with the maximalist analysis, and this is the kind of, and it's a suggestion on where to go. I'm going to try a different strategy. I'm really going to turn the standard causal theory strategy on its head. The causal theories start with prior intentions, and that's the focus of the analysis. I want to start with intention and action. And the strategy has this going for it. All actions are intentional in the intention and action sense. That's what the idea is supposed to capture. So if we've got the jointness, the intention and action, we've arguably got at least part of, if not all of, joint action. And then deliberate joint action, the prior intentions, comes on as a small addition on top of the main story. Right? So flip the standard strategy on its head. I'm going to do it as a minimalist, so I'm going to try and build this with capacities that don't require sophisticated linguistic capacities, representational capacities that are very sophisticated at all. There will be some representations in the picture. And this will be a naturalist move. I'm going to try a naturalist picture that I'm going to try and articulate. I'm not saying that naturalism is the only option here. People more clever than I, I'm sure, could do a nice, necessary, sufficient condition analysis of this kind of thing. Go have fun. I personally find this kind of boring. I'm much more interested in a more naturalistic analysis. I'm going to use the materials that are available to us from the contemporary sciences, the brain and the mind, and the social sciences, and I'm going to try and build it in a way that's consistent with that. And I'm also, the analysis is not going to give us necessary and sufficient conditions the way a good analytic philosopher would. That is, in the end, it's going to be a paradigm and periphery kind of conceptual structure. That is, if all the elements I show you are involved and are enacted, then it's a paradigm case of joint action. Insofar as they aren't, some are dropping out, some are involved weakly, then it's going to be a periphery case of joint action. And if they're not involved at all, it's not joint action at all. So, with those caveats, let's take a look at it. My strategy, or tactic here, is to start with the minimalist analysis again. I think there's something interesting about that analysis. I think it captures some of what we want, and what I want as a naturalist who's a minimalist, but it's not adequate as on its own at all, really, as an account of joint action. So I'm going to, in this part of the talk, I'm going to critique this view that's out there, and I'm going to build pieces onto it that I think turn it into a more adequate view. So first, let's think about the goals. And here I footnote Preston, who in a conversation last night pointed out a mistake I was making because I was following this kind of too closely. That is, they require the goal be represented as something I can't do myself. Right? But Preston said, yeah, what if I say, come on over to my house, Mark, and we'll build a bookshelf. I got this bookshelf from IKEA. Now, he's perfectly competent to do it himself. He doesn't represent something he can't do. But there is a sense in which we're going to do it together nonetheless. So it can't be that we can't do it. So their ME plus X can't be a kind of impossibility claim, but there is a sense in which I represent this goal as something we are going to do as an outcome of the two of us working together. Right? So we have to soften their reading just a little bit. But it's a representation of the goal, and that introduces another weakness in this account. Go back to the chimpanzees here. So, like I said, DeWall built this apparatus, he rolled it up to the fence. The chimpanzees figured it out on their own. Right? He gave them zero training. They figured it out on their own, and then they could do it reliably. In fact, he's got some great footage of, they're all on one side of this large enclosure, and three of them just get up and walk across the enclosure together, and they pull the levers, and bing, they get their food and they go home. Right? That's pretty impressive, actually. Now, it looks an awful lot like collective action, but there is something you might say, wait, there's a problem here. In this apparatus, they're each getting their own treat. So, It's not really a collective goal. Each has his own goal, right? The goal of each of them is, now they recognize they need help for this. They can't do it themselves. But there's something there that makes us look more like a distributed, it's true of each ape that they're getting the treat rather than, now I think this is partly an artifact of the experiment. It doesn't tell us much about the apes yet, though maybe. You know, if there had been one thing there, one apple, one pineapple, right? Now there is a collective goal, so it looks a little more. Problem with chimpanzees is they're not good at sharing food. So when you do that, the whole experiment goes different. So and that might be relevant to the whole story. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in the animals too badly, but I think what this shows is that when we're understanding what's necessary for joint action, we can't just rest with representation. We also have to take into account what you might call objective goals in the sense of joint outcomes of the action. It's not enough that we represent it, but we have to have an outcome that the actions are all producing. Right? So there's some single thing. It's not just what's inside their heads. There's something in the environment which is being produced by the actions together. There's one bookcase that we build. There's one pineapple that we get as we do this. Thinking about the tasks and the processes now, the Vesper and Butterfield and all don't require, as I mentioned, that this task be represented as something a person's doing. For all they care, it's a machine. It's a screwdriver. Now, on the pro side, the strength of this is that it puts joint action into a larger context of tool use and other things we know humans can do. That's nice. But I think it's obviously just too broad, right? It includes a whole bunch of things. If this is me carrying a basket of apples with a little cart, right? Yeah, I can't do it myself, so I use the cart. That's an individual action, quite clearly, right? And so no matter how, obviously I'm representing it in some sort of way, right? So that's not enough. Somehow or other we have to have tasks. The question is, if you think about even, so here's a little sort of thought experiment. Suppose you have an experimental condition where this person was lifting the basket and they didn't know whether there's another person on the other side of the curtain, right? I'm going to be representing my own task. Something has to happen, I assume, over there, but for all I know, it's a machine. And here's something I want to insert into this. It'll point to some things about monitoring as well. When I'm making adjustments in this task, so I start to lift the basket, right? There's a basket balance. There's a lot of, there's going to be errors. How fast do I lift it? Is the basket balanced? If there isn't another task that I'm representing, then any adjustments I do with respect to the goal are going to be completely individual adjustments. Again, it looks like it's true of me that I'm lifting the basket, just full stop, and not you're lifting the basket. So it seems like we have to somehow or other represent and monitor the other's task. But it's worse than that. It can't be in any real detail. So think about an example like this. Fast breaking basketball. Similar strategies happen in hockey and football, so you're more familiar with those games, you know the strategy as well. So fast break, this guy's got the ball, and he has 4 teammates, and they're all running towards the basket and goal down here. There's 2 defenders. Right? So you have a situation, an unbalanced situation. 4 on the attack, 2 on the defense. Now, what's he going to do? Does he drive the basket and score himself, or does he pass to any one of his colleagues? That depends on what else is happening on the field, right? So if this guy runs over here and blocks the lane to dribble, then the pass is open. If he falls back and blocks the pass, then the lane dribble is open. That's oversimplified. The point is that there's actually a lot of tasks, and it's not clear which tasks are need to be done until the situation unfolds in the right sort of way, right? So you've got to track 4 other possible tasks, not to mention these guys, 6, 8, I mean, lots. And you really had to represent them all in detail in the way that you're representing my limb moving for that glass, which you're doing, right? But something else is going on here, at least as well. Maybe the former is too. So we have a kind of conundrum. It looks like you've got to represent the partner's tasks and monitor them in some sort of way. But you can't do that in any kind of real detail, right? At least in a lot of these kinds of cases. I think the minimal architecture gets into this conundrum because it's looked too narrowly at the cognitive system. It's looking just at a set of representations and monitoring. And again, we have good evidence that these things are going on. We have equally good evidence that other things are going on too. And we need to embed this in a larger social psychological set of capacities. And I think when you do, you get a much more plausible account of joint action, actually a real account of joint action in a way that this one doesn't really give it to us. I would suggest there's 3 social cognitive capacities we need to add to the picture to get a minimalist account of joint action. The first is affordances. So this language of affordances has become pretty common in philosophy. It comes out of psychology, Gibsonian perceptual psychology. And I'm going to use it in a thin way. I don't mean to draw in very specific theories. And I'll describe this phenomenologically, but it's important to remember that in the end, this is a relationship between people and their environment. So when you've got a coffee cup. Can I borrow your coffee cup? Just for 1 second. Yeah. So this is the classic example. Coffee cups have a part here that you can grab. Right? That's what I do. So when you're seeing this, right, you're seeing that as something you can grab. Right? Your brain is actually processing in this way, so it's not an accident that it's hand-sized. Right? So an affordance of this object is the handle. Now the affordance is a relationship between me, my actions and my goals, and the environment. So that's why the phenomenological language is a bit misleading. It's not that I'm seeing it as, though there's a phenomenology there too, of course. It's the fact that the environment, given what I'm doing, the environment offers me certain opportunities. So another affordance example is in this room, there's really only one way to get out. We hear a fire alarm, the room offers us one affordance, pretty much, that door. I think that's probably a little too high to jump. But affordances are not there, maybe that is an affordance. But there's no affordance for getting out here. And this is a fact about the room. It's not a fact about my perceptions, it's not a fact about my representations, it's a fact about the room in relation to me and the kind of being that I am, right? If I was the Incredible Hulk, the affordances are all over the place. They're all different now, right? I can just smash them down. So in joint action, we have to recognize affordances that the 2 of us can engage with. So in the basket, that's the 2 handles. The basket has 2 handles on it. That's a joint affordance, right? You can grab one and I can grab the other. In the basketball example, the opportunity for a pass is a joint affordance. I'm going to throw it and you're going to catch it. Right? So we have to be able to recognize those. And again, this is not cognitively very demanding. This is a pretty plain Jane perceptual capacity that we have. This relates our goals and the tasks to the environment. Second, joint attention, or describe it a little bit. What do we have to attend to jointly? We have to attend to the affordances. So, in the basketball situation, if I'm going to pass, I also have to recognize that you see the affordance too, because if you're not looking, it's going to bounce off of your head, and that's not good, right? If you don't see that there's a second handle, and then we're not going to be able to jointly raise the basket, right? So we have to have joint attention on the affordances. Put this backwards. Yep. And on the combined task output. So think about lifting a basket. If I lift it faster than you do, the basket's going to become unbalanced and tipped. So I have to monitor not just what I'm doing. I have to monitor the joint output of our action, right? The achievement of the goal, the objective goal, in order to monitor for error, right? That's what I have to be able to recognize is what's happening with the action so that I can adjust it. Of course, recognizing and monitoring the output is not yet adjusting it. Another thing has to happen here, I'm going to call it role responsibility. That is, I've got the capacity, and again, you can demonstrate this in pretty little kids, to recognize how the 2 actions as they're undergoing are interlocking, right? So you're lifting one handle, I'm lifting the other. With respect to error correction, if I'm lifting too fast, it's not enough that I just slow down. I have to slow down at a rate appropriate to whatever you're doing vis-a-vis speeding up, right? Maybe you're going to lift a little faster, right? And then I'm going to have to slow down to the point where the basket is balanced again. And that's to recognize a role responsibility in the sense of there's 2 things we're doing here. And I don't want to overburden the word responsibility, and I'm thinking this is moral. I'm just thinking there's just 2 parts of this action, and I'm recognizing that those 2 parts of the action. So my claim, suggestion, bold hypothesis, is that this is a minimalist view. Right? This is what joint action is. Again, it's not a set of necessary and sufficient conditions. I think these are a bunch of cognitive capacities that we manifestly have, and in fact, pretty little kids have them, and for some of these things, animals have them. Interesting empirical question, how much and which and to what degree, right? But this is something we can investigate. So when we've got all of these kinds of capacities engaged, right? We're representing the goals, there is a collective goal of the actions, we're recognizing joint affordances, we've got joint intention, we're responding in a role-responsive way. That's joint intention in action, right? This is an analysis or naturalistic analysis of joint intention in action. So what's a deliberate action? What happens when we act jointly that's not spontaneous? Well, deliberate action is an action where we have some kind of forethought, right? I made a plan. I had an idea and I'm going to carry it out. I might imagine some of the possibilities of the ways that things can go wrong. I might evaluate a few options, or maybe not. I think there's a lot of degrees of deliberateness in our action. So all we need to get joint deliberate actions is add the cognitive capacities, which we know we have, for deliberating, right? So at least we have to be able to deliberate. And then we have to be able to take the results of those deliberations and, first off, remember them. And again, there's good evidence of the cognitive system and these kinds of functions, right? Remember them and use them as the goal, as the action's unfolding, right? So when you have deliberate action, these capacities are in play. Now, these sorts of things very often in adult humans do involve language, and complicated propositional content and those sorts of things. That's fine, right? And if you're thinking about a social view, that's going to come later on in the story, our ability to engage in these kinds of plans. Same thing with thinking of little children. To what degree are their actions deliberate and planned? Well, it depends on the child and how old the child is and what else is going on, right? So as they get older, the answer is yes, more and more. When they're 2 years old, not so much, right? So the picture here is joint intention and action is the minimal architecture plus the social cognitive things, those 5 or 6 criteria. And then joint deliberate action is just that, with the addition of some sort of deliberation, some sort of planning, forethought, imagination. But as I said, I think the deliberateness here is a matter of degree. I think there's lots of different things that we do to plan and anticipate actions, and a lot of our actions, there's very little planning and anticipation, right? So there's a kind of grade, I kind of see a smooth gradation from things that are really purely spontaneous to things that are pretty heavily planned and thought through. What I want to say is that the joint intentionality is carried by the intention and action part. So this is the argument. This is really inconsistent with what the standard analyses are doing. When you've got the joint intention and action stuff happening, that's joint action, right? Whatever else is going on, right? Then sometimes, so a problem like you probably come back and say, yeah, sure, all this stuff's going on, but my analysis is true in these cases, and I want to say, sure, it's true, but it's not joint in virtue of that. It's joint in virtue of the joint intentions and actions that come about. The fact that you have people under some highly stylized circumstances making intentions and forming sub-plans and support each other in that kind of way, I imagine maybe it could happen. I think this is just an empirical question. Do people ever engage in that kind of interaction or not? I've never experienced it, but maybe I'm just impoverished. So it could happen, but that's not what's making it joint from this view. Moreover, because it's an analysis of intention and action, I think it covers the whole field, the descriptive field that we're aiming at, right? So, and it does that without ever invoking, notice, not even the language of intention, right? I don't think you really need that language at all. I think you can use it in other ways. And certainly without elaborate cognitive demands of the kind that we see out of the maximalist analyses. So, I submit to you, it would be, were this view true, it would be incompatible with the standard analysis. Okay.
Do we have questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I don't have only one question. The first point is the following. If you allow that in joint action many things remain implicit in the doings, because as you say, we do not, of course, I totally agree with this. But if this is so, and now go back to the intention in action case and the intention before that. And if it's so that, of course, in my own doings, I do not plan any movement of my body, but only in general I ride my bike, or now I ask a question. And in proceeding, I control it. So the picture would be totally wrong to say I have an intention already describing what I'm now doing, because that would, I would even have a plan to plan my language now, and then
yes, right.
Would be so, but if this
so we're in agreement on that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if this is so, that we cannot separate intention in action, because then we still could say, well, a behavior which is, in my language, desire-driven. That means it's merely behavior controlled by feelings of correctness, in contrast to an action with intention in action needs at least, just like the difference between perception and apperception, some conceptual pre-intentional case. Then the fact that we need at least some joint preconception of the joint action still would remain in place. So my argument would be, you're seeming to overdo, to overreact on getting rid of the language out of the whole analysis. On the other hand, I totally agree, but that would most probably need another approach. I totally agree that for the usage, for example, Tomasello makes, the Bratman analysis, of course, doesn't. So we need another approach to the genesis of joint intention and joint attention when we try to put it on the lower level. Nevertheless, there might be a difference between the possibility of monitoring jointness on that very low level and the fact that joint action in the more demanding way, the more responsible way, presupposes language, namely at least some meshed language.
Yeah,
so you know what direction I
help me, so that the thing that needs to be added here is something conceptual, right?
Yeah.
But why is that true? Why do we need the conceptual?
No, but just to put it the other way around. What are we doing when we do things like that? My proposal would be, it's not so much explaining anything, it's developing the language of describing what's going on here. And developing the language of what's going on here most probably needs, for our purposes, a distinction between a pre-linguistic level and the linguistic level where we already act intentionally, and in the pre-linguistic level where we behave jointly or have a kind of behavior jointly and behavior of monitoring. And then the question is, what does the minimalist picture tell us if we need this separation anyway?
Right.
That is
right. Yeah, and what I'm wondering about is, I'm doubting that we need the separation. I want to challenge that separation is really necessary. I think, if I'm understanding, I think that's part of the picture that I want to explode in thinking about action. So I actually want to be quite radical about that.
Yeah,
I want to do that.
but therefore I started with the premise that this post-Austin idea, or the post-Sellers idea, to have intention in action, seems already a result of an overestimating what it means to have a prior intention. Because to have a prior intention is just knowing what I'm doing. So if you ask me, it's just like a perception case in time. If you ask me, I know what I perceive, but I do not have to accompany it all the time.
Right. Though I'm actually skeptical, and it's a well-taken point that, especially in this kind of presentation, I've imported a piece of something that I want to reject, and that's the whole intention and action idea, and certainly I want to disavow myself of a Searle-like understanding of that, where you have this sort of thing. Yeah, and so in the end I want to reanalyze that away, and so yes, and that's a well-taken point.
Okay.
Questions, comments?
Just have a follow-up to what Bratman said. I can dimly recall what Anscombe had to say about intention from my very past reading. It seems to me that she already distinguished intention and action in the 50s, so it's not quite true that nobody thought about that.
No, I wouldn't.
She has a theory that the nature of intention is a kind of knowing what one is doing.
Yeah.
It seems to me that she applies that to intention and action, that she wouldn't thought that some kind of prior action, prior intention is like primary one and it's supposed to be analyzed in terms of knowing what it's doing. But it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that she distinguishes intention and action, and she says, well, that's basically knowing what one is doing.
Yeah. And that I'm suspicious of the idea of knowing that what we're doing. So I don't think we do know what we're doing. I think we tell stories about what we're doing, but I don't think those stories are necessarily accurate. In fact, I think they're inaccurate. It is an empirical question. How often are they accurate?
I would say that it's too intellectualist idea, or it's...
It is an intellectualist idea, but I'll look to naturalist and non-naturalist
She means
resources.
that you are essentially subject to some kind of why question, which admits of some kind of response. I'm not sure if she says that every response to such a question has to be true. So because we are sometimes subject to self-deception and so on, but that's her approach.
Right. And there's elements in Anscombe's approach that I am sympathetic with. I think you're right. She does get a version of this distinction early on, but she does think that it can something like it can always be brought to light. Right. And again, she's doing more ordinary language kind of analysis, and I'm much more of a naturalist about this. I'm happy to say that the ordinary language is just going to be replaced by this sort of thing, so I'm not going to put any weight on the ordinary language, except methodologically things like platitudes, like this is a way in. So it's a question of whether, to what extent in our explanations, and Anscombe's interested in action explanation, right? In what extent in our explanations do we take what people say as the explanation? I think the standard causal analysis also agrees that is the explanation, unless special case, self-deception, they're lying, right? But in ordinary cases, they have direct awareness of their own intentions.
I have one concern. It seems to me that at some point you said, appealing to Austin, that one of the conditions is intentionality. And intentionality we understand in opposition to unintentional some explanation. And one condition was that we are accountable to others. Isn't that a way of saying what Anscombe wants to say?
That's an analysis.
Accountable to the question of why?
Yes, that would be an analysis. That would be a different analysis. But that's not the analysis I'm giving. I was just admitting that as the description of the phenomenon we're trying to characterize.
It's not part of your account, this.
No. I think I have something to say
so
about
you would just accept the
normativity.
first part, you would just accept the first part, what Austin says?
No, as a description as a criteria for including and excluding examples, I accept it. As an analysis of what makes something intentional, I don't think it's a very good analysis. I don't think it's what Austin suggested either. He doesn't say that. it's a lesson you could draw with respect to the project I'm in, but that's not Austin's analysis in the end. It's those part of it.
A bit in sympathy with Austin and Wittgenstein in this course, because then you might face the question if you are not just mixing together two notions, for instance, purposive action and intentional action. Maybe purposive action might cover all of animal action, activities and so on. But we have the word intentional, which has the opposed word unintentional, and I'm sympathetic with what Austin tries to say. It sort of requires this wide question and sort of knowing what one is doing.
Yeah,
would be my challenge.
You're under the illusion that you know what you're doing.
But I just want to figure out in a similar way in which way it is. You want to be defensive in a certain sense and get rid of this overdoing the prior intentions. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That is.
Some would think that's offensive. Happy to give offensive.
And we might even agree that in the singular cases it's complicated because I can be held responsible for something which I'm in fact not, because my intentions were different. And there is no truth of the matter in a certain sense because it's in between of us. Yeah. So I totally agree with the complicated story, and it doesn't make sense to take only one side, only the attribution of intention and only the declaration of intention. I totally agree with that. But now the point is, how defensive can we be here? That means how can I agree with his at least idea that at least in the most general sense I should know what I'm doing, because else it's no action. And that's my worry, of course. The same holds for the joint action.
Isn't that going to be true in cases like this in joint action? Why would it be the case that I didn't know what I was doing? If I was doing all those things that I had on the analysis, what would it mean for me not to know? So maybe I can't articulate it because I don't have very good language like a 2-year-old.
Yeah, because there is a joint behavior, a difference between joint behaviors of animals. For example, when wild dogs are hunting a deer, and the joint action of humans, which are described by Bratman, that we keep to some lands which you play your role and I play my role as when we play a quartet. And in order to make these distinctions, of course, that is the reason why this intentional talk jumps in, because else we don't have the difference between the conduct of dogs and the actions of symphony players.
I guess I'm not too worried about the lack of a difference there. In fact, that's exactly the kind of thing I want to push. I think there's a lot of commonality. Yeah.
Okay, but then we understand each other better. That you want to get rid of the difference and other people want to stress it.
Exactly. Yes. That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay, so it's actually kind of building on this topic. So, Mark, as I understood it correctly, these minimalist accounts of joint action should also be good model for animals, at least higher animals.
I think it is, or put it this way, it's not so much a good model for, but if it's right, it tells us what to look for in terms of similarities and differences. So, to what extent are those chimpanzees jointly attending? We can figure that out.
Because for the naturalist, and you made it clear that you want to build like a naturalistic account. So we have a lot of different behaviors in nature, and like we are looking for good accounts of what's going on. So in a sense, like we need to first have a list of all the behaviors in chimpanzees,
right, dolphins, yes,
and make probably like a priori decision, like where we want to put distinction. So first, do we want to include, because we are looking for a definition, so how inclusive or exclusive should the definition be?
Yeah.
So I actually turned the table like
Yeah.
So first I would probably try to clarify on this. So if we are looking for for account which doesn't need language, it should be suitable for children, probably also for apes and so on. So this is the first comment or question.
Yeah, I think one of the differences is that at the end of the day, as a naturalist, my analysis, or what I'm interested in is not definitions, but in something like explanations. So is there an interesting difference between the way in which we explain what the chimpanzees are doing in that apparatus and the way we would explain you and I working with that apparatus? I think there arguably is. I mean, there's evidence, for instance, on task representation that you take two relatively small children, 3 or 4 years old, I forget what the experiment shows, and they have a task where they have to do coordinated but different things. You know, one pulls a lever and the other turns a crank. You train the children on that task, each on their own task, and then you ask them to switch tasks, they do it immediately. Right? Chimpanzees, it takes just as long to train them on the second task as it did to train them on the first. So there's some sense in which it seems like the children are representing the two tasks together. So there's a capacity they have. So when I explain how it is that the children can do it, or I think, I've been working on this too, what it is the children are doing and what it is the chimpanzees are doing, right? Which gets closer to the Asconian kinds of questions. I think we probably have to appeal to different sorts of versions of these things, right? The chimpanzees are not recognizing the different roles and making adjustments to each other vis-a-vis those roles, right? But they might have some of the other things. Maybe they have a kind of joint goal representation. Maybe they have some certain kinds of task representations for each. So it might be they instantiate some of these things, but not all of them, right? So we're a kind of paradigm case in this. If this is all the things that are involved in us, what do we find in the animals? And in fact, if you put this into an evolutionary kind of perspective, it ought to be the case that we find these things in animals in various degrees and strengths and combinations, right? So they might be good at this thing, and so they might be good at this thing. We're the ones who are lucky enough to get them all together and survive with it, right? So you expect it. So that means, I think that gets around the point you made about having a kind of an a priori definition here. I think we take these paradigm cases, look for the things that are needed to explain them, and now we look and see how the animals, which of these things, or are they doing something completely different? That might give us new resources for understanding ourselves, right? If there's something else that they do that I have not on my list and I haven't thought of.
Okay, and do you think that on the account you provided, it's somehow possible to operationalize the terms, like to distinguish between the different cases? Because I think this is the crucial problem, like how to operationalize the concepts, and I think nobody has been quite successful in this. That there are always so many interpretations that collide with one another. So what to do?
It's difficult. I'm glad I have clever friends who are working on these problems. I think the terms I'm using here are operationalizable. The question is, in any given experiment, have we done that in a way that rules out various interpretations and focuses us on one outcome? And they're all actually taken from the literature that's already been doing this, right? So these are things that are in the literature. So to a certain extent, they've already been operationalized. But behavioral research is really complicated and really hard. And so it's, things like that chimpanzee experiment, the experiment pretty radically determines our interpretations. But that's true about lots of sciences, especially when you're in the behavior sciences or the health sciences, where the things you're trying to study are really complicated and there's lots of extraneous factors you need to. So, that's a way of just blowing smoke.
I got a bit confused when you said that you're not sure whether something like Bratmanian joint intention exists and that it is an empirical question.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
How could this be empirical tested? If this is the concept that you defined, it's more of a conceptual question.
That's right, but I'm actually wanting to deny Bratman that. Right, that it is really a conceptual question. I mean, it could be, in which case I guess I'm going to say, well, look, go have a good time. If you want to make up definitions, fine. That's something people could do. But what's at stake? Right? What's at stake in this? And yeah, Bratman thinks that we can get at this. So this is the philosophical methodological difference. He thinks we can get at this through some sort of analysis of the language and bashing our intuitions against each other. I think that that's not really going to get us very good intellectual progress, hence I'm a naturalist. But now, from this naturalistic perspective, right, so if you take the minimal action kind of view that I'm developing, then it's perfectly possible, if I'm right, then it's not in virtue of the stuff that Bratman's pointing to that we do act jointly. That's the important point. That the jointness is carried by something else. Now, could it be that we do have intentions with the interlocking structure, that planning structure that he has? I don't see why I should say no. But now it's an empirical question. Do we have intentions that ever look like that? Maybe, sometimes. From the point of view of the understanding and explaining joint action, it really doesn't matter, except in those cases where we really, so when someone had that structure of intentions and they had negotiated this out and they talked it through, my explanation of what they're doing and why is going to need to appeal to that too. Sure, that's fine. But that's the sense in which I think it's an empirical question, whether anybody actually has those intentions. The conceptual question, whether that's the right analysis of joint action, if I'm right, then that's not the right analysis of joint action. Right?
But Bratman says just that it's sufficient conditions.
Yes, he backed off. This is what he says in the 90s.
He admitted in his last book, 3 years old, that he is happy with kids having some sort of joint action because his definition is not about necessary condition but just sufficient, and he aims just to elucidate some kind of nature joint action, some kind of full-blown.
Right, and now
which is limited, of course, which is limited, but it's a kind of hedging.
Exactly. I think he's hedged his position into complete uninterestingness. Right? Why should I care that you can set up some definitions this way if they're unnecessary?
Well, he has some explanation because his original.
He wants minimal sociality.
Was to give some functional specification of some kind of intentional state, like intention for individual case, which is supposed to explain some kind of rational intrapersonal planning and coordination over time. And the case of joint intention is supposed to explain this intrapersonal rational planning and coordination. You might argue against that it's not necessary, but that's kind of a relatively clear agenda compared to other philosophers, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
He knows what he expects.
Absolutely. I don't mean to not respect. I think I respect his work a lot, and he is. The virtue is he's clear. But I worry now that what we've got is it becomes sort of its own artifact. That is, if he's giving us a functional characterization, then he's responsible for these kinds of things, right? And if I say, look, those aren't the functions. Right? You described this machine functionally, but the machine doesn't work that way. The machine works this way. Then it seems like you've got a bad. Is that even a good explanation of a part? Right?
I'm not expert on Bratman, but I'm not sure if he thinks that when he thinks about the structure of intention, second-order intention, second-order belief, common knowledge, if he really thinks, or other people think, that it has to be occurrent thought. In my mind, I'm not sure that I could say that. Because it's obviously that it can be challenged in this way that nobody has this complex structure actually on one's mind, like conscious thoughts.
Same points against Grice and Lewis's analysis of convention. I speak for myself, having lived through all these arguments, I'm just floored that people accept that. That is, I'm going to give you this really complicated analysis, and by the way, it's not in your head. But okay, so what is it we were analyzing here? Is this the semantics of these kinds of sentences, in which case let's use possible worlds and find whatever artifacts you want. But no, they don't say they're doing that. They say, I'm giving you an analysis of convention. Okay, conventions are things that people really have, and emerge, they evolve, and intentions and meanings are things that people really have, they emerge, they evolve, and so the story is, it seems like you've just taken away, right? You've given it and taken it away, but it's true. People much smarter than I think this is a good move philosophically, so there must be something to it. But I've always...
We have one more question.
I think just one simple question. Why you didn't mention, you said that the first challenge from this minimalist direction was specified by Tolson. But it seems to me that many people think that even Searle has a sort of minimal account compared to Bratman, for instance. So it doesn't require any common knowledge.
True.
He doesn't require this mention. He just said that we have a kind of primitive sense of the we.
Well, more than that.
Even
Right.
chimpanzees and hyenas and lions have this kind of elementary primitive
Right.
sense of we, which doesn't seem, which is mysterious in some sense, but is not super complicated like.
No, true. I think Searle is the in some ways the best contender in terms of best opponent for the kind of view that I've got, but his intentions have a lot of propositional complexity. Yes, in the primitive sense of the we, but when you look at his analysis, it's all this stuff about through this intention I'm causing. I mean, it's this really complicated, arcane interior structure to those to the content of the intentions, which again, certainly, I mean, it's not phenomenologically true, and Searle takes the phenomenology series more seriously than I do, but I think in an explanatory matter, it just seems like that's not, it's just spinning your wheels. And so I think this is a replacement, but yeah, Searle is the person I want to lock horns with on this. I understand he's in Rome right now.
So, we ran out of time, so I'll finish the discussion now. Thank you once more.